Welcome to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk, ICRT's weekly interview segment, bringing you conversations from and about Taiwan. I'm Keith Manconi. Today, we're going to be paying a visit to Next Animation Studio, which is part of the Next Media news empire. For more than half a decade now, the studio has been cranking out animated renderings of the news. Some of it just straight by the numbers serious news that can be used to add in that visual element to a story, give your viewers a better idea of how that plane crash happened, how that cancer treatment works. A lot of it, though, is decidedly less serious. Their Tomo News brand is famous for taking something of a skewed view on the news, using exaggerated characters, sometimes obscene visual puns to tell their stories. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. There's really no point in me trying to describe it. If you haven't seen it, put down the podcast, take a couple of minutes, Google Tomo News, and watch some of these videos. They are irreverent, they're very funny, well worth a couple of minutes of your time. Well, over the past couple of years, all of this work that they've done has gained some measure of international acclaim. It's been discussed on late-night talk shows in the U.S., the studio even got into something of a feud with Conan O'Brien a few years back. So, it's fair to say they've made something of a mark on the international media scene. And I wanted to know, all these years on, what are they cooking up now? So I recently made a trip over to their studio in Taipei's Neihu district to speak with Michael Logan, who leads the team focusing on international news. We discussed how they keep the animated news chugging along, keeping up with the fast-paced news cycle, and where the technology is leading them in the coming years. Michael Logan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for coming by.
So the content that you've been developing over the last several years, it's been famous for some time now. 2009, 2010, famously, you guys animated a little bit about the whole Tiger Woods escapades. That blew up. You later did more content on the JetBlue flight attendant. You've done pretty much every high-profile farcical news piece over the last 5 years or so. So you're not the new kids on the block anymore. You're a very established sort of operation at this point. So just give us a little bit of an update and tell our listeners what you're working on now that you're in the 5-6 year mark of operations.
I think what we've been doing is, we've been establishing animated news as a medium in which you can tell the news. When we first started out in 2009, 2010, we got a lot of criticism. A lot of people didn't think that animation belonged in news. Now what you're seeing is there's a lot of competition out there. A lot of the major networks in the United States also animate the news. We have more than 50 clients around the world that take our animated news via Reuters. So I think over the past few years, we were just really establishing that animation belonged in the news, and it was a tool that you could use to tell the story.
And so the basic process is still pretty much the same. It's looking for those funny stories and trying to find a new twist on them. Has that been more or less the same trajectory all the way along?
Sure. I mean, with Tomo News, it's all about the humor or what other emotion that you can push. So we tend to look for stories that have legs that are going to go viral. With hard news, it's all about filling in the missing action. So, for example, you had this very horrific mass shooting in Orlando. So we'll do a very forensic recounting of that event and animate it, and that animation gets combined with footage and photos. So it's really about either taking the headline story and finding details that you can animate, or it's about finding a viral story or a story that has the potential to go viral and animating it and putting it out there.
So international is in the name of your title, so it's definitely a very internationally oriented project that you manage. What are the main markets that you're focused on? Is it mostly North America, maybe Western Europe? What are you looking at?
So the Tomo News product is distributed in English, and we get about 50% of our audience, in the United States for that. But we also get audience in, India, the UK, Canada, Australia. So the Tomo News channel that we have, it gets about 60 million views per month. When it comes to stories, we tend to look to the United States, but really, we're looking for stories that will play well in almost any market. Tomo News is distributed in a number of different languages, and we find that the elements of a good story will work in almost any language that we distribute it in.
All right. Now, many of our listeners have maybe read about Tomo News, Next Media Animation before, so they might be somewhat familiar with this, but I always think that it's pretty interesting. You guys have a pretty unique production line that you've set up, and that's, you were talking about the competition a second ago, but the experience that you've built up over the last 5 years in figuring out that production line, there's a real learning curve there, and anybody that's going to want to compete with you is going to have to go through a similar process of figuring that all out. So it's kind of the secret sauce in a way. So tell us a little bit about, don't get into too much of the nitty-gritty if you want to keep it the secret sauce, but tell us a little bit about how you can turn around animation so quickly. I understand it's between 3 and 4 hours often that you can make an animated video for a breaking news story.
Yes, the process takes about 3 hours, and we've been doing this since 2010. One of the reasons that we're fast is we have a vast database of 3D models. A single model might take about a month to make, depending on the complexity of that model. But we have a library of probably close to 100,000 models. So when news happens, we can go into the database, pull all the models that we need, and the animators can begin to animate. Another thing that makes the process go fast is we use motion capture. These are the suits that you see actors wear that got the little bulbs on them.
How we got Smeagol.
Exactly. So it's the same technology that's used in Hollywood and in the games industry.
So is there a guy working here that has a full-time job putting on a leotard and going through those moves all day?
There are several guys and gals that, that's their job. They're, some of them are acting majors. Some of them are, animators. And, their job is to put on what looks to be like a black wetsuit, and it's got little white bulbs attached all over their suit, and they act out the motions.
And so basically it's a matter of getting the news, having a writer put down all the facts for the animators, and if you're taking a funny take on it, finding the jokes in it, turning it over to the guy in the suit, and then just putting on a huge team of animators. Is that the basic breakdown?
So here's the process. It begins with the writer. The writer gets their assignment and will research the story and write a script. So it could be a funny script or it could be a serious script, and gathers visual reference materials as well. That writer will go to a storyboard meeting and explain to the storyboard artist what the story is about. In that meeting are animators, modelers, and the motion capture people, music and sound effects, and the editors. So he gives the rundown to the storyboard artist. The storyboard artist has maybe a half hour to draw out the storyboard. And then a second meeting takes place, and the storyboard artist then explains to everybody what the story is about. Everybody goes off. The motion capture actors will do the acting. The modelers will go into the database, pull all the models, and tweak them as necessary, and then hand those over to the animators, who will then animate the story and take the motion capture data that the motion capture actors have given them. Animation comes back, about 3 hours later. Then that goes to music and sound effects and the editing team, and they put it all together.
All in 3 hours?
Correct.
I mean, how many animators are involved in this? It feels like this is a very labor-intensive process.
So we divide everybody up into what we call eggs, and a typical egg has about 16 people in it. and they can do 8 stories a day. So they're working, in an 8-hour shift. Their job is broken up into 8 hours, and they can do 8 animations.
At this point, do you have any sense for what is the most used character in your repertoire? Is it Donald Trump at this point? Is he taking the lead?
Yeah, we've been using Donald Trump a lot lately, and of course we're going to be using Hillary Clinton. Donald Trump has been a revelation, I would say, for us.
Good for comedy writers around the world, I imagine.
Yes and no. I mean, I think the thing about Donald Trump is he makes it too easy, and everybody knows he's kind of a buffoon, but you're not really breaking any new ground by saying he's a buffoon in your comedy. So I think I would have much preferred a different candidate, because you could actually offer some insight about that candidate, but I'm not sure what further insight that we can offer about Donald Trump that nobody else hasn't already realized.
The challenges of comedy news writing right there for you. Now, I'm struck by just the fact of how many people are involved in this process. My understanding is that a lot of your staff, they're from many different countries. It's kind of a multinational effort in a way. So let's talk a little bit about why Next Media Animation is happening here, because it's a pretty unique product you guys got on the ground floor that's very early. You hit this before anybody else. Do you have any thoughts on why Taiwan was the place to do this?
Sure. Our parent company, as you know, is a Hong Kong listed company. So, Next Media, we have operations in Hong Kong, and we have operations here in Taiwan. But in a lot of ways, the animation studio could only work in Taiwan. I've lived in Hong Kong for 7 years, and kids there, they want to be accountants, they want to work in the finance industry, and that's what they train for. In terms of artistic studies, maybe you get a few fashion designers that work in southern China, but in Taiwan, I think there's more emphasis just in terms of studying the arts, and I think there's far more creativity here than you find in Hong Kong, and so that's the reason why the studio is based here versus setting up in Hong Kong.
I mean, it's also very interesting, though, that a lot of the references that you make in your videos, animated references to American culture, North American culture, whoever's writing this stuff is very fluent. I mean, is it a challenge to make jokes that make sense to audiences around the world? And is that something that, it's also important to have a very international staff base for?
Yes, I think, humor can be very culturally specific. So for example, in Taiwan, in an animation, if you're talking about a husband who's being cheated on, you might animate a green cap falling onto his head, which everybody in Taiwan knows what that expression is.
Du Maozi.
Correct. And so our U.S. audience wouldn't necessarily understand what that means. And then there are sort of, certain expressions in the English language that wouldn't necessarily translate here in Taiwan. So, for example, if I had 2 people on a bed and they have a salad bowl and they're tossing salad up into the air, people who are familiar with the language in the United States know what it is that I'm getting at when I animate that wouldn't necessarily translate well here in Taiwan.
Which we don't need to elaborate at this moment.
Well, no. I'm not. Anybody that can picture that in their mind knows what specific image we're going after.
Point taken. Absolutely, point taken. So now you mentioned a moment ago, the attitudes towards animated news is something that has definitely evolved over the last couple of years. We've been seeing somewhat animated stuff in Taiwan for significantly longer, especially, for example, the front of the Apple Daily. It's much more flamboyant in terms of the way that they present their news than anything I've ever seen in the U.S. outside of maybe the tabloids. Do you think that attitudes towards animated news are somewhat ahead of the curve in a way in Taiwan?
Well, what you just described, I think, is part of the next media culture in that our news is very visual. If you look at Next Magazine, if you look at Apple Daily, news is presented in a visual way, and that's because when news is presented in a visual way, it's your understanding of that happens a lot quicker. So when Next Group was setting up its TV station here, our boss, Jimmy Lai, was looking for a way to differentiate that television news from the competition. And his observation is that a lot of television news, you don't really actually need to watch it because it's just talking heads. You'd only need to listen to it. So he wanted to find a way to actually give you a reason to watch. And that's how he came up with animating the news by providing key visuals that would help your understanding of the story. So I think, Apple Daily, Next Magazine, the animated news, it's all about emphasizing that visual so that you have a quicker understanding of what's going on.
And do you think that in any way, just given the fact that the Tomo news brand, the comedy news brand, is so visible in the West, do you think that cuts against your argument that no, animated news is, it can be taken seriously? It's a legitimate form of journalism. Do you think that having people, giving them those associations with dancing pandas and bears and all the crazy stuff, do you think that makes it tougher?
I don't think it makes it tougher. I would say that, animation as a tool in the hands of other media organizations, they do something different with it than what we do with it. And that's not necessarily an argument against animation. I think what we did was we showed that, animation, which typically took, many years to produce something, you could actually do it same day and therefore apply it to the news cycle. So the way we use that tool and the way, CNN or ABC News in the United States use that tool, it's very different, and that's reflective of our, respective media cultures.
Now, kind of a big focus whenever you look at any Taiwanese company or organization that gains some international profile. I think people in Taiwan are always very proud of that. They always want to point to the fact that, it's Taiwan stepping out onto the global stage. Before we started this interview, you said you're not quite certain that you are raising Taiwan's international profile. But, when I look at the media that you're getting internationally, the phrase that I kept on seeing over and over again was those crazy Taiwanese animators are at it again. I saw that in so many different news articles. So, there's some recognition that this media is coming from Taiwan. There is something special going on here. I mean, what are your thoughts on the way that the world is receiving your work and perhaps, receiving a little bit of Taiwan along with it?
I hesitate to say that we've raised Taiwan's international profile because I don't want to say that, we represent all of Taiwan, because obviously we don't represent all of Taiwan. And I can't tell you how many times I have read a comment on one of our animations saying, gosh, those guys in Korea are really weird, or those animators in Japan, they're so strange. So
any Thailands yet?
Thailand and also infuriatingly China. So until our audience gets it right 100% of the time as to where we're from, I would say that our work, just in terms of raising Taiwan's international profile, is not yet done. But yeah, we've received a lot of attention. We were on Conan and Bryan. We've been on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. The Simpsons did a parody of us. So yeah, we did create this thing called Taiwanese animation.
Did you lead the charge on trying to get those rebuttals to the Conan O'Brien show?
Yeah, I remember that because it happened right over Thanksgiving, and basically what happened. I was in New York at the time, and my boss Mark Simon was in New York as well, and Ziggy Chow, one of our marketing people, came in and said, "Hey, I was watching Conan last night, and they had this Taiwanese animation," and she had like air quotes when she said Taiwanese animation. because what we found was he did have a bit on it, but it didn't use any of our material at all. He basically had hired an animator in California to do his segment, and he called it Taiwanese animation. So we were kind of taken aback by that. The fact that he would have this segment and call it Taiwanese animation.
But it boosts what you're saying, that you have created a thing called Taiwanese animation.
Yeah, correct. So that's how the feud got started, because other people who wanted Taiwanese animation for their shows had gotten in touch with us. For example, we had done some work for The Good Wife, the program on CBS, and they got in touch with us and said, hey, can you make something for us? So we were upset that Conan didn't get in touch with us to make his Taiwanese animation, and that's how the feud got started. And we created an animation as a rebuttal to his original animation, saying, hey, that's a cheap knockoff.
That's I guess a lot of people would be surprised that the cheap knockoffs are actually coming from Southern California.
We were surprised, and we called him on it, and he took it in the spirit in which it was intended, which was we weren't angry at all, but we pretended to be angry.
That's what celebrity feuds are all about. So let's look now to the future a little bit. And, the technology is changing all the time. I'm sure that you have to adapt along with it. What's coming up in the next couple of years for your studios?
Well, we've been focused on virtual reality. I think if you go onto YouTube or you go onto Facebook, you can see these 360 videos, shot with these 360 cameras. And we've done a few animations that are 360. We won an award late last year for a 360 animation featuring Donald Trump. It's his wild ride to the presidency. So that picked up an award at CES. 360 is kind of like virtual reality light. It doesn't have any of the interactivity that people are going to expect with virtual reality. So we're looking at HTC Vive and Oculus. Right now, we're developing some content for the HTC Vive. So I think what you're going to be seeing is animation news was sort of like the first step. But the next step is going to be virtual reality, where you'll actually be able to interact with the news.
So I put on my headset and I see that deadly bird pandemic all around me is kind of the idea?
It could be a deadly pandemic. You could be inside the body, looking at, how various diseases, wreak havoc on your body. You could be at some news event and see the news event as it unfolds. And, perhaps, interact with the elements of that news event and maybe try to change the course of things.
Oh, okay. So if you have a problem with something Donald Trump said in his speech, perhaps this would give you the opportunity to express that.
Sure, you could walk up to Donald Trump and tell him exactly how you feel.
There we go. We won't give anybody specific ideas. Obviously, there's other politicians you could single out. But okay, very interesting stuff. Now, the selling point, though, I mean, this all sounds like a huge challenge, because the selling point for you guys is the fast turnaround. And the more complicated the technology gets, doesn't that mean that fast turnaround becomes exponentially more difficult?
Yeah, with virtual reality, we're not at that point where we can animate news inside virtual reality and distribute it same day, which is absolutely necessary if you're going to do news within the news cycle. So I think our initial focus will be doing stories that have longer legs. So for example, an election story, that has longer legs than something that is breaking. But as the technology develops and as it matures, it will get faster. So
I guess the name of the game is just staying one step ahead of all the other companies that are working on this.
Yeah, I think the name of the game is sort of figuring out where the audience is going to be and what medium they're going to be in. And so, I mean, right now, audiences are online, but the virtual reality audience is very nascent at this moment. But you have a number of platforms coming online, and as more people spend time on these platforms, you're going to want to be there ahead of them.
All right, so a lot of path forwards, a brave new world for news and animation that we're looking at right there. We've been speaking today to Michael Logan. He is the content director for international news at Next Media Animation Studio. Michael, thanks so much for speaking with us today.
Thanks for coming by.
All right, and you can find those crazy videos at us.tomonews.com. Or you can find the serious news stories, if that's the sort of thing that you're into, at newsdirect.nextanimation.com.tw. We've got links to all that stuff on our blog post about this episode. That is it for the show. Thank you for listening to another podcast edition of Taiwan Talk. Taiwan Talk is, of course, broadcast every Monday at 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. right after the top of the hour newscast. Or you can find the podcast version wherever you just found this one. You can also follow ICRT on Twitter. Look for us at ICRT News, at ICRT100, or look for me at Keith Menconi for updates on our programming and updates on stuff going on in Taiwan. We're going to have to round things out there, so signing off from the ICRT studio, I am Keith Menconi. See you next time.